In the 2016 presidential election, women's rights are sure to be one of the top issues, especially if Hillary Clinton is running. Joining us to talk about that and his book, Every Third Woman in America, How Legal Abortion Transformed Our Nation, is Dr. David Grimes. Doctor, thank you so much.
Thanks, Larry. Good to be with you.
I appreciate you being in here. Let's talk about women's issues and Hillary announcing, and here talking about women so much in her announcement. It is absolutely going to come to the forefront, especially in her campaign in the 2016 presidential campaign, and you think that's a good thing?
I do, and she's been a champion of women's rights and indeed endeared herself to many of us. In 1995, with her speech on women's rights at the Peking Women's Conference, in a very famous speech in which she said that women's rights are human rights, and that's really it.
Let me just push back a little bit, because those who oppose Hillary Clinton, namely Republicans who oppose Hillary Clinton, will point out that she certainly didn't do so much for human rights when she was Secretary of State, accepted money from countries that have horrible records on women's rights for her Clinton Foundation, and they thought she talked the talk but didn't walk the walk when it came to internationally looking for women's rights. Is that fair or unfair? I
really can't speak to a record in that regard, but domestically she's been really good on women's issues, in favor of contraception, in favor of women's issues, including abortion.
Yeah, it's interesting, and this is another thing that I think is fascinating when people talk about women's issues a lot. It seems like it always gravitates towards one issue, that is the women's issue, that defines the women's movement, when it should be much broader than that, should it not?
I couldn't agree with you more. It always seems to center around this very divisive issue of abortion. It's much broader, including contraception.
And the other part of it that I think is fascinating is that when you look at the polls, there are, depending on what polls you look at, by the way, there's either more or less, but about split that many women are pro-life.
Well, I'd be hesitant to use the term pro-life. They're pro-birth. They're not really pro-life. And once the child is born, they essentially lose all interest in the child. But the most recent polls I've seen suggest that about 70% of Americans support a woman's right to choose.
Back up for 1 second. Pro-birth, they lose all interest in the child?
If you look at the voting record of the people we're talking about, they're interested in the fetus. But once it becomes born, they lose interest in the child. Just look at the voting record.
I'm talking about women that could be mothers. You're not saying they lose interest. You're not saying they lose interest in the politicians. Yeah, I was specifically talking about the fact that this is labeled as a woman's issue, and yet as many as half, but at least 40% of women are pro-life.
Well, again, I object to the term pro-life because they are pro-birth. They're not interested in the life of children after they're born.
But you can't say that.
I can.
No, you can say that about Republicans. I understand why you're saying that, but you can't say that about women that are polled as to how they feel. You're saying, yeah,
you're right. I'm speaking to politicians.
Yeah, that's specifically what I'm talking about. And so the point I'm getting at is, how did half the women get excluded from the argument, or half the women get excluded from this so-called women's issue if they're pro-life?
No, everyone's opinion deserves to be heard.
Okay.
I'm just saying that the politicians lose interest in the child once it's born.
I just looked at a poll, as a matter of fact, before we did the interview, that said a lot of people are actually pro-life and pro-choice. And the way that happens is that they believe there should be abortions, that you should be allowed to have one, especially if the life of the mother, or rape, or incest, but that there should never be a third-term abortion. And that there's almost 80% or 70% that think that late-term abortion shouldn't be legal. Where do you think Hillary Clinton comes down on that, and how do you feel about that?
Well, first of all, the term third trimester abortion is an oxymoron. There is no such thing. If you look in a dictionary, either medical or lay, abortion is defined as removal of the fetus from its host prior to viability. And that's around 23, 24 weeks. So when we obstetricians rarely have to end a pregnancy after that point, it's not an abortion, it's something else, but it's not an abortion.
What would you call it?
Pregnancy termination, hysterotomy, D&E, there's a number of terms for it, but it's not language
is that
that's prior to viability.
Is that across the medical field that they call it that? It's not,
yes.
It isn't called an abortion?
Both lay and medical dictionaries all concur. So this language is quite slippery.
Oh,
but I agree with you about the issue of people being opposed to abortion, and over my career, I've on many occasions done an abortion for a woman who sat across the table and said, well, Dr. Grimes, I'm opposed to abortion. And I say, I understand. She's opposed to it in theory, but she needs one, and I understand that.
I think here's something we can all agree on. this is definitely going to be an issue in 2016, and especially Hillary Clinton's going to be a big player, and she'll be talking about this a lot.
For sure.
And I really appreciate you coming in. The
My
book is
pleasure.
called Every Third Woman in America: How Legal Abortion Transformed Our Nation. David Grimes is one of the authors with Linda Brandon. David Grimes, of course, is a physician. Thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure.
When we come back, Dawn takes us to the Schuylkill Center, a hospital for wildlife.